Welcome to Cult Connections. Let's see what we are taking a sideways look at today. Hello, it's Ian here, and welcome back to Cult Connections. Today I am joined by Lara. How are you, Lara?
I'm fine, thank you very much. How are you?
I am I am very well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today we're going to talk about the version of Fawlty Towers that you probably don't know, and there's actually three versions of that. And this is a very fun this sort of episode there to do. It's a very odd one as well, but but what I'd like to talk about first of all is that Fawlty Towers. It was first broadcast in the 1975. It was a huge hit, and they're worldwide. Very well known, very much sort of loved, still loved now. I'll often go back and watch a random this sort of episode, and like it as much as I did, way back. Um, shown so many times over and over, and it's something that I know well, and certainly that the world knows very well. Um, and also there's a unique their sort of tradition of their British sitcoms actually getting remade, and remade in the American their market. So I'm thinking of things say like their Sanford and their Son. That was very very popular. Three's their company, and more recently their Office as well, which is an absolute huge their hit.
Mhm.
Um, for you though, Lara, and you like British sitcoms and their sort of humour, but your first sort of taste of that was a bit sort of strange, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, it was. I was about 7 years old, and my family, my mother, my father, and I had just moved to Iran. Yes, that Iran. And there was only about 1 hour of American television a day. Or I shouldn't say American television, I should say English speaking television. Of course, when I was a little girl, that meant American to
Yep.
me.
Yeah.
And one of the shows that I absolutely loved was Man About the House. And that was my first exposure to British television, basically. And of course, when we came back to the States, years and years later after the evacuation, which is a long story in and of itself. But, Three's Company came on, and I didn't realize at the time that it was a remake of that Man About the House. Um, and of course, if I had, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it quite as much as because I'm really actually quite opposed to American versions of British sitcoms. It just doesn't. It's not the same. But those sitcoms, Faulty Towers and whatnot, it carried me through while I was there. And of course, then it became quite tumultuous. Um, with the start of the revolution and whatnot. So it really stuck in my mind as a time to be happy and to laugh and to reconnect with other English speaking um, uh, people, I guess,
Mhm.
my TV,
Yeah.
other than just in school and whatnot. So yeah, it meant a lot to me
Mhm.
at a very
That's
young age.
yeah, and it is amazing how those very formative things absolutely stick with us, and they live with us there forever,
Oh, yes,
don't they?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And well, I've always had, my father was Estonian, so the culture was very different, and my mother's family was Irish, so I had a very, and of course, growing up around the world, a very distinctive upbringing, and um, the humor and the wit that I've always been drawn to British TV, British people, British culture. Ever since I was knee high to a grasshopper, we had British neighbors when I was very young and living in Maryland before we moved overseas. Um, and I've always been fascinated. I was always drawn to the accent. And I said, that's where I belong. I didn't, this was before I even knew what England or the UK was. But I just knew that it was a huge part of my life. I was so connected. And I really had no idea why. I mean, when you're a kid, what is overseas? Overseas is, going out of state, or something like that, until I actually lived overseas and visited, traveled the world and whatnot. But I just have always been drawn to the sophistication, um, and I guess my humor was also very in sync with with everything, United Kingdom wise. Because I'm a huge buff. That's mostly what I watch. It's not just the sitcoms; it's the dramas and things like that. And I always thought I'd end up over there, acting wise or whatever. And I ended up marrying a British, a my now ex-husband was from England, so he was from London, and I'm like, oh well, I got it right, but slightly wrong at that point. Who
But
knows?
yeah, maybe the other way around. Maybe Marika. I don't know, but yeah, yeah. Things don't always go how we think it might do we?
Yeah.
I always find it amazing when we talk about say faulty the towers or the Monty Python that that to me seems so they're sort of British, actually, how sort of popular it is everywhere else.
Yeah.
Um, because when I watch it, it seems to be full of the sort of references that only we should really get. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but and it's an odd one as well because I think that that their sort of translation as well. I always find that quite they're sort of fascinating how some things will sort of travel worldwide and then others
And
won't.
translate. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
They translate.
Um,
Well, that's one thing that a lot of people, because like I said, I watch a lot of British TV, and when I get my friends um, to watch as well, because I know they'd like it, it's I take for granted the fact that I can interpret things, like phrases or tap versus faucet,
mhm.
what some of your little nuances are, and the oh, what's the word I'm looking for, the like when you say Papa Cherry uh, in the UK, totally different meaning than what we have here. And oh boy, did my at our wedding, the best my husband's best man mentioned that to one of my bridesmaids who was only 14, I think, at the time. And when it of course means to blush
Mhm.
in the UK, and that's not at all what it means here. And the mother, who was also a bridesmaid of mine, went absolutely ballistic when she heard him, and I had to explain, oh, wait, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean the same thing. But when you have things like that, and the way you say things, and of course there's also the accent, a lot of times people will have a hard time interpreting, but I think I also attribute to the fact that I was just a natural, um, with understanding everything that I was seeing and hearing, even though I might not have known quite what it exactly meant, I have good instincts, and a lot of intuition, and that helped me interpret uh, a lot of this stuff. And of course, being exposed to a lot of most of my friends are English, or I have several Scottish friends, and one or two, I think, even in Wales, which they are really hard to. That's the time where I really have to. I'm like, huh? Say it slower for me. But um, when you get past that, you can really start enjoying other cultures, and then it really comes. It starts to become more natural when you can decipher more
Hmm.
things,
Hmm.
and it, it it helps. Even I have some trouble with certain sitcoms, the newer sitcoms, um, that they have a lot of slang that I wasn't used to. Um, that I'm like, huh, what? Or new products, like Tim Tams and things like that, that people might not necessarily know what
Hmm.
you're talking about, the
Yeah.
biscuits and things like that. And it takes a certain amount of, you just have to kind of let that go and then interpret all the rest, and
Yeah.
and really
That's
embrace it.
yeah. That's actually quite the thing. So as a big film, um, they're fan, and obviously the sort of American films are worldwide. You know there's so much part of our
We simplify
um,
things. It's
but
eh,
but there are references there, Lara, that actually you don't really know, but you kind of know. So, like, if you're watching actually a lot of comedies or sort of teen sort of films and you were growing up, um, you would hear references to things like, well, did you get to, first day base?
oh
Now
yeah.
we don't play baseball, so baseball's not a thing, and it's like I think I kind of know what you mean, but we
Yeah.
don't really,
Yep.
But it's
So you're
so
in the same situation.
it's mentioned. Yeah, but it's mentioned in so many films, and so you just kind of feel like, well, I kind of know what that means, even though we don't really. Um, so there's loads of things like that, but it doesn't stop you liking something. That's the thing. Even with all of the bits that you don't know, um, you can still watch a film or the sort of TV and still
Yeah.
get all sort of everything from it.
Yep, it's kind
Um,
of like a song. If you don't understand the words of a song, which I will be the first to admit, there are a lot of songs out there that are even done by Americans that I have no freaking clue what they're talking about.
yeah.
But you have to, you kind of get the idea by the music. Well, wouldn't be all glitter and bells if they're talking about murdering, slashing somebody, or so it's the whole general genre, that you kind of embrace, and you let it affect you. And I do that a lot of the times with anything. I mean, it's also kind of like watching a foreign film. You might not understand a word that they're saying, and you might not catch all the, if it's got the subtitles, you might not necessarily read all the subtitles or whatever, but you get the feel of what that movie is like. Pan's Labyrinth was a great example of
Hmm.
that, which I
Yeah.
could, oh, what a movie that was. But didn't understand anything, and I, didn't have a whole lot of subtext. I mean, subtitles to it, but dang, you really got the nuance of what that film was about. You didn't even need to know, with just with the help of the music and the setting and the expressions and the vocal inflections and things like that. It just, you don't necessarily need it. And that's what I use whenever I'm in one of those spots where, okay, I have no idea what they're talking about, no clue whatsoever, but I can gather what the feel of the scene is supposed to be, and we'll just let it go until I can understand again. And then I'll look it up. And I'm like, okay, new reference for next time.
Well, one thing that absolutely, everybody does know about, and certainly Hollywood TV executives know all about, is to make their money and
Right.
to have a successful their show. Um, and in 1978, what they thought was, let's make a pilot version of their Fawlty Towers, and we will set it over here, and we will actually cast, two well-known, actors in our show.
Yeah.
So they got Harvey, their Corman, to play Henry Snavely, and they got their Betty White to play his wife, their
Yes.
Gladys. And what they did was that they remade the Fawlty Towers.
Well, they tried to
They
remake
tried to
it.
remake it. To be fair, they they basically lifted it up and planted it over,
Yep.
stateside with this one. So this is a pilot version. They only made one, um, and as it went on, I kind of liked it a little bit. By
Oh,
the end, I was
I did
laughing.
not.
But
I
do you
did
not
not.
like it? No.
Yeah, well, again, I have, maybe it's a prejudiced against Americans trying to do British sitcoms, because I think British sitcoms are so spot on. You just can't. They very rarely interpret well into American um, uh, acting styles, et cetera, et cetera. And I did not like this at all. This is that, I cringed when I had to rewatch this for this particular thing, because I'm like, I did not like. I remember it was very forced to me. That's how I remembered it. It was very forced, very campy, and not as sophisticated as the original Faulty Towers. I mean, you cannot duplicate um what John Cleese did. You just can't. The way he delivers lines, his mannerisms, the script writing, the timing is a major thing in British sitcoms. um and it was very forced to me, and very, it was like the Carol Burnett show. Actually, it was like a scene from the Carol Burnett show, um, which both those actors, Betty White and Harvey Korman, Harvey, of course, being one of the main characters, and Betty was very often a guest star on it. It just felt too pushed
Hmm.
to me,
Okay.
and they treated it almost like a stage show. Like when things would go wrong, like when she didn't put the phone quite on the head, um the thingy that you talk into, the headpiece or whatever. Well, I call it headpiece now. Oh boy. I'm showing my age. The thingy on the handle, the cradle, when she didn't do that, and like a normal person would just put it back on, and or like when his tie got caught in something and he just continued on. I'm like, no, any normal person would have stopped, either said something about it, or done something. I remember thinking, what would John Cleese do? He would have made it a thing.
Yeah.
And instead of just oh, I need to deliver this line, so I'm just going to keep going and ignore this. And it didn't work for me, and I didn't enjoy it at all. The only thing actually about that show, if I remember correctly, that I actually liked was it Pedro? Was Pedro
Pet-
the bellhop?
Petro, his name
Petro,
was.
yeah.
Petro,
He,
yeah.
yeah, he was the only thing I liked about it. He was the only one with a decent amount of timing and characterization that reminded me of as much as possible of the original to me.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I really actually enjoyed about this particular
About
incarnation.
this one, yeah. It's quite funny. So, Well, actually, it's not quite funny. It wasn't particularly funny, but
Exactly.
um, but what I did find, I mean, it's a fairly much a straight remake of the hotel inspectors their episode, so
Yeah.
it
Yes.
almost follows it fairly much beat for beat, and
Yeah.
you can see it. And I think by the end, just that being they're familiar with the original
Yeah.
episode kind of got me through it. Um,
Well, see, that's exactly the opposite for me. That's what made me not enjoy it because I kept on comparing it to the original. And that's now usually I'm able to sever my preconceived notions as much as possible from something that I expect
mhm.
versus what I'm given. I did that with all the Star Wars remakes, Solo and things like that. Being a huge fan, and I'm like, you cannot go and recreate a character that's already been established for decades, But once you let go and accept it for what it is, instead of what you wanted it to be or what you had in your mind, you usually can enjoy it. Well, this is the one exception that I can think of in my life that I was not able to do that. I couldn't let it go, and I'm like, oh, they're just butchering this in my mind.
Mhm.
Now, the other characters, the other lesser characters, I think maybe it's because Betty White, I kept on seeing as Betty White, playing Betty
Yeah.
White. As she always is, whether she's playing Rose or, a Hallmark person, it's always Betty White. And you cannot unsee that. And Harvey Korman was playing Harvey Korman in the Carol Burnett show,
Mm.
as he usually is. And I
That's
just
interesting.
could not.
Yeah, yeah. Now that's an interesting one for me. So for me, I don't know. The Carol Burnett show. I don't think that was ever broadcast over here.
Really? Wow.
So I don't think so. No, and that's the amazing thing. So whenever I talk to anyone, they're stateside, they're always amazed by the things that we didn't get because
Hmm.
there's so many dramas and there's sort of comedies that we don't know, just because there's far too many of them. So we'd only get we would only actually get a certain handful of them, and actually probably comedies were the one things that we didn't get that much of, um, and actually I think prior to probably the to to the 1980s when that's where we saw a big sort of shift. Um, so sort of prior to that, British sort of TV wouldn't have a lot of their
Yeah.
comedy shows at all.
It
Um,
just wasn't sophisticated. I don't think the
mm,
British people would have appreciated it. It kind of is like a dumbed down version of
mm-hmm,
British TV. The
yeah,
comedy was very different. It's like comparing apples to oranges or, French to German. It's a whole different feel to it.
uh-huh,
Um, and even the actors, the acting wise, Americas have a very, and I don't want to generalize this too much, but in popular pop culture at least, they have a very surface um, acting style. It's a lot of it has to do with appearance and not a whole lot of depth or, for example, in British acting, there's a lot of filled pauses, what we call filled pauses, where you can see the character thinking. And American acting, you don't get a lot of that,
mm-hmm,
until you get into the more advanced, more sophisticated stuff. But in acting or in comedy, no, you don't. No, it's just not. We just don't have in my opinion, the training for it, most um, comic timing. Now, there's of course always exceptions to the rule, like Robin Williams was an excellent, excellent comedic actor in America, and his loss, of course, is just, I still feel it. It's he was the closest thing to me to what your average British actor gives you. It's a very I don't know the word I'm looking for, but I'd like to say advanced. You have a couple hundred years over us, acting wise. So, maybe in another couple hundred years, we'll get to that level.
It's funny that we should talk about, what we do know and what we don't know. So, um, so like for you, Lara, so you're saying, well, actually, I'm really familiar with, both of the lead actors, because of the Carol Burnett show.
Yes.
Also over here, Harvey Korman, we would only really know from the Blazing Saddles, from
Yes.
his role in that.
Yeah.
Betty White, however, in the 80s, so one of the sitcoms that we did get was actually the Golden Girls, and that was a
Yes.
huge hit over here. That was so popular.
This also had B. Arthur in it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, which we're going to get to just very shortly,
Yes.
which is very strange. Um, but yeah, you're right. I mean, for me, Betty White was too nice in this.
Yeah.
There wasn't an
Too
edge
weak.
to it. Yeah.
It was like a watered down version to
Uh-huh.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And watered down versions of anything don't really
Mhm.
appeal to me
Mhm.
very much.
One thing that I did read as well, though, was that the actors themselves, they didn't feel comfortable. They felt that like the characters and the dialogue was too sort of edgy, and why
Yeah,
would
which
they
is
say
very
things like this?
strange.
But that's the whole point, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
um, you know,
Exactly. That's why I said British sitcoms didn't interpret very well over here.
yeah.
The actors just didn't know how to handle um, that type of uh, what I consider sophistication. They just didn't get it.
So
Perfect
many,
example.
yeah. I mean, so many of our big shows are the ones that we still look back on now and be really, really fondly. Hardly any of the characters you actually like. That's the thing. They're not very likable, and the comedy tends to come out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was,
Um,
yeah, I can think of one particular one. Well, I can think of two that um, I absolutely loved. This probably the second show that I became obsessed with was Are You Being Served? Now
okay. Yeah.
that was very what Americans would consider risque, especially for the time,
Uh-huh.
with all the innuendo and all the things that it had. You just don't find that in America, American sitcoms at the time. It was very what some Americans at the time would consider not prudish, exactly the opposite,
Yeah.
lewd.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, but I found it absolutely brilliant in the writing and the delivery and the characters. And I loved every one of them, even the ones you weren't supposed to like. And then the other one was Keeping Up Appearances, which was a little newer. I think that was in the
Yeah. Yeah. That
80s.
was a
I
bit
think,
later.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, oh, Hyacinth though, whew, oh man, she reminded me too much of my mother, so I absolutely hated her, but I wanted to love her, and I loved the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, ooh,
Yeah, we all
you
we
would
all know
never be able to
someone
do
like
some.
that.
Yeah.
That's the thing. We all know the sort of hyacinth. It's funny you should say about are we being served, and about how it could come over as being um lewd, as you say, Lara. Um, what what we would probably term as being they're saucy.
Yes,
for a
yes.
British sense that
So
was
yeah, exactly. Oh, I couldn't think of a proper word, but, yeah, I mean, I find that with a lot of European or even Australian TV. I mean, the things that you guys would put on TV, it's just Americans are so prudish,
yeah.
in comparison, and to me, it was delightful. Of course, we've kind of caught up, sort of, but not in the humor aspect. We don't use that in humor as much as we should, unless it comes across as very childish.
Hmm.
Um, but see, that's what appealed to me. It was so real. It was so natural and funny. Um, and really, like I said, rather brilliant in the way that they insinuated certain things but didn't exactly quite say it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the sophistication. With America, you have to literally say it, and it's not as funny and it's not as charming.
There's there is a definite art form there to that, I must admit.
Yes.
Um, and it's funny as well because something like "Are You Being Served" would go out at say 7 at night, 7:30. I would watch it when I was, so high. It wasn't. And our parents wouldn't be like, "Oh God, this is awful. You can't,
Yeah.
hear this or see this." So, um,
It's not
and
like it's
it's
page 3.
no, no, exactly, yeah, exactly. Now, now Snavely's quite unique in that it was it was made in 1978, and at that point there'd only actually been one their series of their Fawlty Towers.
Yeah.
Um, and again, what's sort of unique between American and their British sitcoms is how we perceive things to be they're successful.
Hmm.
So by the end, Fawlty Towers only had two their series. There were only 12 episodes,
Yeah, but
there.
that's enough to know,
Yeah.
something is brilliant.
Um, However, if we move on to 1983, and we'll come on to the second version, and that is Amanda's, or Amanda's by the Sea, as it's known. Um, and I think this one lasted I think they made 13 of these in their total. And this starred the B. Arthur as Amanda Cartwright. And obviously we know her from they're the Golden Girls, and I think their Maud was a famous one as well
Yes,
in
yes, that
the
was her.
States. Yeah,
Yeah.
uh-huh. Um,
She played the
and
same type of
she
tough character. She always does. She plays B, but unlike the other sitcom, as Snively, is it Snavely?
Snavely,
Um,
yeah.
that she was absolutely believable as that character. And that is the only incarnation of Faulty Towers that I actually really liked. I was surprised. I had never heard of it, never saw it before until, you know, uh, I did my research for this, and I was quite pleased. I'm like, okay, the feel of it, the timing she had, and the kind of nastiness, not quite what John Cleese had, but it was close.
Hmm.
The biting remarks, the quippy comebacks, that was the same to me. So it got the feel, the aura of Faulty Towers to me, and I really liked that.
I think it's interesting what you should say there because I think if you want to remake something, you need to make it the sort of different as well, and actually turning that sort of casting on its head. So, Basil isn't Basil. Basil is now, Amanda. So
Yeah.
it's like even that sort of gender changes, it does feel better. It feels more sort of fresh. And actually, thinking about B the Arthur Arthur now. I would say even over here, we only really know her for the Golden Girls, but she plays a very similar sort, you know, their sort of character. She's very
Yep.
sharp.
That's
Doesn't
all she ever
suffer.
played.
Yeah, doesn't suffer full sort of gladly. Um, so I think that was a smart move. It's actually, how can we make it slightly different? um, but actually play to our lead actors their strength, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the ensemble was so much better. You know, you had, instead of the wife, you had her son, who was the meek and mild and, uh, thought of everything. And then you had the daughter-in-law, who was snooty and kind of flighty in that snobby kind of way.
Hmm.
And then of course you had the ever present, servant slash bellhop, which was it Aldo
Aldo,
for
yeah.
yeah. And he was, brilliant as well, and it all kind of played together, and you could see the similarities in the scripts, and the delivery was so much better. Again, it's comic timing, and it's all that kind of, and I'm going to use this word again, biting. The biting kind of quips back is what ultimately, to me, defies Fawlty Towers. It's the quintessential John Cleese,
Hmm.
um, that that you capture there, and if you don't have that, then it's a watered down version to me. And from that base, all the other characters react, and it defines them more. Once you have I mean, you can't have a skeleton without a spine. It's just bones. It's that spine that makes a skeleton, and puts it all together and connects all the pieces.
It
So
was. I did like it. It was interesting, wasn't it? And I think out of the three of them, this one certainly stands up. They're the best, I think, and really we've sort of touched on what makes it good. Um, like I say, it's funny how to judge their success. So they made 13 of these.
yeah,
By all accounts, it wasn't a big hit.
no,
Um, but it's funny how we judge something to be they're successful. So as I said this sort of previously, so Fawlty Towers there is only there are 12 of them, and if I think back to some of the other great sort of sitcoms that came out of sort of Britain, in the 70s and the 80s now. I don't know if you know the Rise and Fall of Reginald Perrin. I don't know if you've
no,
heard of that one.
no, that's one I
Oh,
haven't
that's a
heard of.
great sitcom. Now I'm sure that's only got two or three their seasons, which would be six.
Yeah,
So their season
yeah,
is just their six. Um, their Porridge, which is another great one. They're a British one. That only lasted two or three of their seasons. Um, they're the Young Ones, which was a
yep,
1980s one.
yeah,
That's only two seasons again, so that's only 12 their sort of episodes. But for yourselves, for the American TV to be judged as a success, it should be 10 seasons of
yeah,
20 episodes, and
yeah.
it's like it's so
Will go
different
on for
because
10 years.
yeah, and it's like there's thousands of them, and they're all exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing that I use my own little scale of how good a show is, whether it's a sitcom or not, is not how many episodes, especially like in British TV, like your seasons are so short compared to
Mhm.
us, and then you have to wait like at least a year to
Yep.
for the next season, and by that time you've forgotten everything. But what I say is, okay, there might have only been 12 episodes of Faulty Towers, but look, people are still talking about it as a great show all these decades later, 40 years later or so. And, with only 12 episodes, there are some TV shows here in America that have, like hundreds of shows, but people don't remember them.
Hmm.
And of course, there's things like the Golden Girls and um, uh, Family Ties and things like that, that with Michael J. Fox,
Hmm.
that went on forever. Cheers went on forever, and people still talk about them, but they didn't have as much of an impact. People now,
Yeah,
people talk about Friends, but can you really pull the episodes, from your head, or are you just talking in general? Oh yeah, that was a great show. It was a great ensemble. I'm like, okay, tell me, show me an example. Do you remember?
yeah.
No, but I just remember I enjoyed it and it ran for a really long time. I'm like, that to me isn't necessarily great then if you
Hmm.
don't remember everything about it. Well, not necessarily everything, but you know, um, to me, a show is successful if it stands the test of time. It's like songs, There are some songs that you will never forget that have an impact on society or worldwide or whatever. And even if it wasn't successful at the time, as you know, millions of dollars of sales and whatnot. But if people are still talking about it 50, 60 years later, and they still remember it and they still sing it, that's successful.
Hmm.
That's successful.
Yeah.
And, same with TV or movies, for that matter.
It's interesting that you should say that, Lara, especially say about their friends, or the Golden Girls, or their sort of Cheers, like you mentioned. Again, sort of Cheers was one of the first ones that that was actually broadcast over here. Like all of the episodes were sort of broadcast, and it was popular. But you're right. Can you say, "Oh, I remember that episode"? Can you remember what the title was? Can you remember exactly
What
what
happened? Yeah.
sort of happened? Yeah. But with something like Fawlty Towers, there's only 12, but you can remember. There is. Um, they're the Germans. Uh, there is. Where they try and put on the nice their food for the night. There's the
Hmm.
one where the guy's sneaking in his girlfriend there for the weekend, and
Yep.
you're able to name them all, or to think, right, there was that one, that one, that one, that one. They all stick there.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's difficult for the other ones. I think, like for me, if I think of, say, the Blackadder, uh, I can
Yeah.
probably think
Another
of
one that I really
every
like.
episode, singularly, or they're the young ones. I can probably think of every single young ones episode, because there's only 12, but they stick in your
Yeah.
head that that's what happened.
Yeah.
All the
Same with
way through them.
Thin Blue Line for me, and
Hmm.
Vicar of Dibley. Were ones that
Yeah.
I constantly see myself going back as a go-to, when there's nothing on, or I'm not getting satisfied with what's on TV now. I always use my go-to British sitcoms that I that I have, and I'm like, I've seen this, what, 20 some times now, this one episode, and I have it all memorized, but I don't care. It's,
Yeah. Uh-huh. It's funny you
you
should
never
say
get
that
bored
now.
of them.
Yeah. It's funny, but I mean, I like a lot of the sci-fi and things like that, and I like this sort of Doctor Who's one of the
Of
things that I
course.
really love. Um, Now Star Trek I really like. Now I really like Star Trek. Um, but when I go back and I think, right, I fancy a bit of next this sort of generation. But there's only a few episodes that I will go back to, and there's a whole lot, and I'm like, no, I don't
Meh.
really want to watch that. Yeah, it's like, no, I
Yeah.
don't really want to watch the one where Data is exploring his feelings again, because you've already done that 5 times, so it's like, okay,
It's not
but
exciting.
yeah, yeah, exactly, but um. Anyway, so the Amanda's by the Sea, I think that gets a thumbs up. I think
Yes.
that one did work. Apparently, Arthur herself didn't like it. I think she turned around and she didn't feel that it worked for her. But
Eh,
yeah,
she, it's different. She was. I don't know how the American public reacted to it because they were so used to her as being Maud, and Maud was a very strong feminist in the 70s.
hmm
Very, very uh, um, almost angry uh, feminist. And to see her in anything, but especially when I have to say the one thing that distracted me about the show was all her voluminous long skirts that were still, tagged in from the 70s. But and they reminded me too much of Maud, which she always wore long vest, of the time, long flowing vests and dresses, like almost like muumuus, but they weren't. I can't think of the Kafkins.
right.
Um, but it reminded me too much. It was too distracting, especially with her height. But that's again a signature B. Arthur thing. She always wore long, even in the Golden Girls. She always wore long, either sweaters or jackets or shirts. Not necessarily skirts as much, but they were always, elongated. Her very tall figure, an imposing figure. Um, and again, I think that's also why it the character worked so well for me, is because she was very imposing,
hmm
and that's something that B. Arthur always played. I think it was probably you know mostly herself. You can't but be that when you're built like that, I guess. But maybe she just didn't. It wasn't received well, or maybe it it was too soon after Maud, or I don't know.
hmm
I I I can't figure out why she wouldn't have liked that, but
No.
for whatever reason it's a shame
hmm
because it was good. But
Yeah.
again, I didn't know about
Yeah.
it until
Well, Well, we know that she moved on to the Golden Girls, and that was a big hit, and that was a big
yeah.
hit worldwide, and people still think very fondly of it to this day. Now we're going to skip forward to 1999, and dare I say, um, something that I found painfully unfunny. Pardon
No
the
pun
pun.
intended.
No, well, yeah, actually, yeah. Um, so this is the singularly titled Pain. This ran for 10 episodes. This had John Larroquette,
Yes, Lara
yep,
Katz.
as Royal Pain, haha, and Joe Beth Williams as Connie Payne. And you know what? This was too nice.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
exactly. It's too boring.
Yeah.
I was so disappointed because I like John Larroquette, and he, for me, he got his start in a sitcom called Night Court, where he
hmm
played a kind of a strong, bitter, kind of nasty character, which I he could have used more of that in his portrayal of Royal. um and it was, again, it was very watered down, and I love Jo Beth Williams. I've liked her since Poltergeist, actually. Very strong character there.
hmm
She was so weak and forgettable, though. She just it almost didn't contribute anything
hmm
to the storyline, and that was such a disappointment. I really did not find anything that I could invest in this, except for, again, Mo the bellhop. Was the only character that drove anything for me. It's that quintessential um, co-star that really pulls the scenes, gets your attention, and whatnot. He was the only character
hmm
that the rest were just boring and forgettable,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, it was sort of drab. It wasn't hugely funny.
No.
he was a bit rude, but he wasn't that rude. He was just a bit odd, and
Yeah.
she was a bit sort of nothing.
She was a wet
And
blanket.
yeah, and and even though they were supposed to be at sort of odds with one another, and I found this really odd because we were talking about, British sort of saucy humour, and there was a little bit in this,
Yeah,
but at
just a
one
little.
point, like they were, a way to have their sex, and I was like,
Yeah.
Basil and Sybil hated one another and would
Yeah.
never have, it was like,
Yeah.
no, what is this? This is
Exactly.
wrong.
Yep. Exactly. The relationship and everything was just wrong. It was wrong, and that's what made me cringe. That's what I ultimately think of when I think of um, American uh TV and producers trying to put on a British sitcom that was popular and well done, and well established. It just failed in every aspect, and I cringe at the even thought of it. It's like nails on a chalkboard to me. It was painful to watch, no pun intended,
Yeah.
but it really was. It was painful. And again, I really like the actors individually and things that they did, but this just did not work at all.
I think what gets me is that we're talking about. I mean, luckily for uh, their podcast, I'm actually glad that their three versions exist because that's what we do. We talk about three things, so it's really good that there are three versions of this out there.
Yeah.
But surely by now, they would have thought, you know what, this isn't going to work. We've already had two goes at it.
Yes.
We're not going to have a third one. Um, you know, you know what, Lara? If you come back in there 10 years' time and we're talking about a fourth go at it, then I think something
They
will be
better have British
seriously
people
wrong.
playing in it. That's the only thing that would work is get a British person to play in the
Yeah.
show. That's the only way that it will you know work successfully. Otherwise, it's just I have a pet peeve. It's actually probably stronger than a pet peeve, but it's when producers, Hollywood, especially Hollywood, try to recreate classics. You oh, it automatically I have a prejudice against it, whether it's a well-known classic movie or classic TV show. Just don't do it. Do something original. Don't call it,
Mhm.
Miracle on 34th Street when it really isn't. And stop trying to do the old stuff that was wonderful. You're banking on something, on somebody else's success, and it's not going to work. Very rarely ever works, for me, and especially when it's cross-cultural.
Mhm.
It rarely works, because there's just certain elements, and again, if you wrote it well enough and got good enough actors, like Amanda by the Sea it was close to me. It
Mhm.
had that feel, even though the story, it was different enough. It was supposed to be by the seashore, but it
Mhm.
wasn't.
Yeah.
You couldn't see the sea anywhere, but she still, called it by the sea, the inn by the sea, which to me was a funny element. It was different, and I if you stick some British actors, or at least actors that got training over in the UK, it might work. There's a certain element. It's not, I wish people would understand, it's not just words on a paper. It's a whole way of writing things, a way of thinking that's different, that sets everything apart from, British versus American. And you cannot cross contaminate
Mhm.
usually and get a success. Um, it just doesn't work. You can't have, if, and forgive me for lack of a better, reference, but it's like if America, our sense of humor is childish and unsophisticated compared to what we're talking about British sitcom being, even a little spicy, and but very sophisticated in the way that they present it. American can be very lewd and crass in
Hmm.
comparison when they try to do it. You cannot have a meshing of those two. It just doesn't work. It's one or the other. It doesn't blend well. At least I can't think of any example that is completely successful. Like I said, I did enjoy Amanda by the Sea, or Amanda's, that it was different enough, but it had enough of the same elements because the writing and the timing and the character, the bite that was there,
Hmm.
it had enough of that. Um, and I think also what Americans have to consider is timing. Not just timing comically, but timing as in what era you put this. Like this, if Amanda's by the Sea had been done in the 70s, um closer to the actual Fawlty Towers, it might have been more successful.
Hmm.
When it was just at the very beginning of the 70s, late 70s, 80s, um, we hadn't developed that with the things that were going on in the world, and with, um, it just wasn't the right time for that show. The audience, at least the American audience, wasn't ready for something like that,
Hmm.
especially with all the things that were going around worldwide and whatnot. And of course, as I mentioned, I was in Iran at the time of the revolution, and that played huge here in the United States. And we were coming just off of that. We were, had a new president, and everything was kind of chaos for a while. And I don't think that it was received well, maybe also because, again, the timing was
Hmm.
wrong. If it
Yeah.
had been done maybe even a little bit later, might have successfully. I personally, I think if it was done closer, if they reversed Snavely and Amanda's by the Sea, might have been better.
Hmm.
Might have, both shows maybe would have because the Carol Burnett show was, very, very popular from the 70s through, I think, the early 80s, um, when she finally retired the show. It might have played better. I don't know.
Yeah.
I doubt that I would have still liked it, but
I I think actually it comes down to their magic there, and I think Fawlty Towers had their magic and they
yeah,
captured it, and you can't really recreate that, no matter
no,
how hard that you try. It's
it's
just not
it
really
had
going
the
to work.
perfect combination of the writing, the actors, and the ensemble. you
Hmm.
you cannot have a successful show without that, and that's
Yeah.
why some of the shows that we mentioned, the American shows in the 80s, with the ensemble, that and the writing, that seemed to really flourish. But
Hmm.
again, for me, they're not so memorable. I mean, they're
No.
memorable because there were lots and lots and lots of episodes. Now, for me, also, shows like Family Ties with Michael J. Fox. Now, that I can remember individual episodes and things
Yeah.
like that. But, and Cheers, the same thing. The characters are very distinct. They all work well with one another, and they're all necessary for all the other characters to develop and to grow, or not,
Hmm.
as the case may
Yeah.
be in some of them. But it all works well, and that's that magic that you're talking about. For me, at least, it's
Yeah.
that magic combination. And it's hard to find, at least, I don't know. There's some dramas that, American dramas now, that really, to me, hit home like that. But comedies, not so much. I don't think
Mhm.
we have a hold on comedies yet. But there are some, but they're not haha funny like British sitcoms. They really aren't.
if 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 you wanted to find out about these three versions actually of their Fawlty Towers, they are available on their YouTube there to watch. So if you are intrigued by it, please do go and they they give them a watch because they're quite something, and I think it's a fascinating thing to actually they sort of talk about. And once you realise that they exist, you're like, what? What are these things? Who on earth made them? One thing that I'm going to end on with their pain. So like I say, all of the episodes are on YouTube now. This must have been from someone's home, their video, and the adverts are also on one of the episodes. I actually found the adverts more they're enjoyable than the actual show itself. There was more fun watching the adverts. So
Yep.
it was a nice snapshot of the time. Um, yeah, haha. You know what? It's a fascinating thing. It's amazing that it's out there, and it's a great thing there to actually cover. But let's face it, if you want something good, just go back and watch their their Fawlty Towers and don't really bother with these three because they're not very good. One just little bit. Now we have had the Betty White in their Snavely. Obviously, we have had B. Arthur in Amanda's. Now in Pain, the lady who played Flo, who was one of the older ladies. So there's the two older ladies, which is a recreation of the Fawlty Towers their ladies as well, played by Ellen Albertini, their Dow, who did indeed appear in the Golden Girls. So
Hmm.
there is a link all the way through there, the three of them, which was nice to find. Um, so I did like that. That was really good.
Oh, sorry. I forgot
Not
to
as
turn
good
my
as
phone
Star
off.
Wars, that's for sure. But
Yep.
what I would like to say, Lara, is actually thanks so much for their coming on, and it's been great to hear your views about it and what you like about their sitcom as well. So it's been really nice to hear that. We can hear you somewhere else, though, Lara. So would you like to tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Right now, I do voice work for Madison on the Air, which is a fabulous original. Well, it's original in the script writing now, but they're based on old timey radio shows, and it's a very modern, fun, funny, creative, brilliant twist on things. And I play various characters in almost all of the episodes. There's only been a few episodes that I haven't been, even a little part in. But yeah, I do voice work there, and it's a wonderful, fabulous show. It's called
It
Madison on the
is.
Air,
Mhm.
and it's another podcast. So give it a listen.
Yeah, please do because I must admit it's one of my favourites, and I'm not a regular for a scripted podcast. That's maybe not something that I would actually listen to very much. However, I really like this one. It's such a clever the sort of idea. It's really sort of gripping. It really grabbed me, and it's funny. And I must admit, Madison for all her faults. I think I'm a little bit today sort of smitten with her. So she's a lovely character. So yeah, please do. And anyway, thank you, Lara. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you
And
very much for having me. I
you're
enjoyed
very
it
welcome.
tremendously.
Good. And thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of Cult Connections. Please like, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we would love it if you left a review. Follow us on Twitter at Connections Cult for more fun, share your ideas, and maybe even be on the show. Thank you.